How to tell that you're getting somewhere in this kind of extraordinary attempt to alter consciousness. Whereas when you first began trying to do it, it made you dizzy and confused. Now it's ordinary states of consciousness that make you that way. What gives, wondered one man, that the mind does not seem thrilled at hearing fluent ideas expressed like the body does at seeing a basketball dunked? What gives? Is this a fair description of an ordinary man's view of life's workings, or what? When experts don't know what to say next, they'll run out some testimonials and case histories. One advantage to operating in an academic or professional setting is that you don't have to do a singles act. What's the difference between a man who knows the secret and a man with suicidal tendencies? The first man's already done the deed. While some philosophers, spiritualists, and other city-scarred thinkers have opined that all religions are at their core the same, and that it is man who has erroneously separated them into apparently conflicting entities, but what so, young camera buffs? There is an alternative angle. Is focus and development, and that is to look at the situation as though life purposefully staged it this way, to make it more difficult for the few to ever untangle themselves from this illusionary segmentation and perhaps see directly what is going on. And as always, as is my duty, I'll point out what should be becoming increasingly obvious, the fact that, along with every blister, comes a chance to kiss the king's sister. Noted one man, if it were not for my ability to titillate and torture myself, my hair shirts would continue to return to me from the cleaners. After pleasing exercise, a hot shower, and a good stretch, a man luxuriously sighed, what could feel better than one's body? And his mind said, hey, how about me? After years of, first bringing to his mother, then to his wife, all of his whiny complaints regarding the never-ending petty annoyances of everyday existence, like a button falling off his shirt or that they can't get the rattle in his car door fixed. This one man came home yesterday with a brand new case of the fumes and moans. Doris, they've raised the price of beer $1 a six-pack. And she set him down at the kitchen table, pulled her chair up to his, knee to knee, took both his hands between hers, and locking his eyes to hers, said to him in her most sincere, serious voice, Frank, you're just going to have to face it. Life sucks. Today's joke definition. Talk. What the ordinary do to keep themselves from realizing what's actually going on. Okay, now for tonight's serious definition. Talk. One of the activities in the overall arrangement of things that helps keep ordinary men from realizing what's actually going on. Everyone feels mentally uncertain, and the only ones who ever do anything about it are those who realize it. Today's vehicular fable. In a faraway nearby land, all of the people are born in a Chevy. Before it's over, some move to caddies, a few even to Beamers. But all of them are still earthbound mediums. And a wild-haired prince from a foreign kingdom who passed through here found the situation unacceptable for a prolonged stay. From the conscious adventurer's expanded view, the one thing you can say, undeniably true about where you're from is, I want to get out of here. Daddy, is that why mystics never have a chamber of commerce or tourist bureau? The danger of being simple is in seeing to the body at the expense of the mind. And the danger of the sophisticated is in seeing to the mind at the expense of the body. And lastly, the danger of being more conscious is that there ain't none. And you know it. I don't know why you keep making me write stuff like this anyway. Every day, as a personal aid, one man would randomly pick up a volume from his set of encyclopedias and say to himself, So, what subject will we study this time? Except that every day he randomly picked up the same volume.
Yeah.
No matter how else you look at it, what you're involved with fits the definition of a thankless task if no one else is interested in it but you and of your rights. Was that supposed to be some sort of sop for those seeking the mystical grail to help them rationalize the lack of popular support for their pursuit? And you know, good viewer, for those anemically so involved, it sure could be. From the more Perceptive's Self-Defense Handbook, only reveal about yourself that which you know to be untrue and misleading. The advanced version of this being in never talking to yourself seriously. Some music industry news. You remember the recent story of a man who read and pondered the proposition that, under quite ordinary conditions, simple observations of the two simultaneously will reveal that it is almost as though man's body and mind live two separate lives in two separate worlds. Well, someone in our audience notes that within those seeking the secret, this sounds a whole lot like the internal relationship between their old mind and their burgeoning new one. You know, it's heartening to discover that there are those out there really interested in such as this and paying close personal attention, even if I do have to invent them. But what else is new? And is that not the name of this tune? Tonight's Insiders Q&A. Q, what's almost as much fun as that spatial experience itself? A, the working for it. Well, I said almost. The prime requisite of civilian intelligence is the ability to argue the obvious. How the more perceptive can commit suicide. Either step off the carousel or back on it. I know it makes no sense, but it makes no difference. It'll work anyway. Today's demographics update. A man capable of such originality of thought as to be able to fully entertain himself mentally is a poor prospect as a season's ticket holder to any sports, artistic, or religious activity. Daddy, is that why you see so few real mystics out in public? No sense, because most of them are too ugly to be seen. Pause, pause, pause. Gee, Dad, that's one response I'd surely never thought of. And the old man broadly smiled his theatrical smile of full misplaced pride and bravado, which gave the lad yet another possibility of benefiting from things not from the land of the sane, expected, and plagiarized. Today's theological definition, religion, mysticism with a headache removed. To up the ante, when this one man got to where he could effortlessly write without cessation on any subject that crossed his mind, he broke several of his fingers. And as you may have suspected, he eventually had to break them all. Phew, he said later, what a relief. Even if you're not dead, if they do your biography, you might as well be. As a challenge to one mythical warrior, life said to him, take what you now know and come up with some public presentation thereof that is not based on submission to some heroic figure or on physical disciplines and rituals. And the warrior went away and pondered the possibilities of accomplishing such a task, but soon was neurally ambushed from another direction and instead began to reflect on exactly what shifts in its interstructures constitutes to life a challenge. Yeah. Though athletes believed they coined the term no pain, no gain, as always, they were simply reading from a prepared script, having in toto to do with matters far exceeding the physical. The literary of existence. Speak fiction, live non. Okay. For the naturally critical and argumentative in our audience, you can have it this way if you like. The literary of existence. Live fiction, speak non. Oh, for those of you who'd like to stay tuned, we got a feature later in the show. This coming, we're going to present a quiz that you can test to see if you are stupid or not. Well, in case you're stupid enough that you need a test to make that kind of determination. Now the news items. A man who cannot distinguish between things as they are and the reflection of things will never be able to separate that which he knows from that which he wants to know. Many times have city thinkers served up the phrase, "The beginning of all wisdom is the knowledge of one's own ignorance," which sounds fine, except they want to leave it at that. All aboard, good citizens. Train now departing downtown Paris for all points no further away than the immediate suburbs. All aboard, you hear? Being alive is basically a serious business. Only domesticated pets and men wag their tails. Academic or official history. Mythical records with the fear factor removed. Okay, we can be a bit more precise. It's not that men are fearful to recall their actual origin and background, but rather that life has made them feel so. Then you could ask yourself, why would life do such a thing? The mind of one conscientious consumer of things related to consciousness would remind itself, whenever confronted with offerings of routine knowledge, why buy when you can rent? After his first visit to Istanbul, for several days after, one man could say nothing more serious than, "Yep," and began to muse about how many trips it might take before he could not speak at all. Man is hormonally enthused for a while and intellectually enthused for an even shorter while. All of this takes place automatically. Thus, most people have no experience in producing their own excitement. To first think, life teaches, be a thief. Ordinary humor is funny in only one direction, while the transcendental variety is not so constricted. A doctor examined a man and said, "You have a brain tumor and it'll cost $1,000 to operate and save your life." And the man said, "But I don't have $1,000. I only have this 50. And the doctor replied, "Oh, did I say brain tumor? I meant a hernia, and $50 is just fine." And he grabbed it. Yes, transcendental humor is not bound by normal restrictions, assuming you can spot it when you see it. At the Paris station of the Mystical Orient Express, a man asked a seasoned, successful traveler to describe Istanbul. And he replied, "Perhaps the most striking thing about the place is that there is nothing to criticize about it." One day, a man stood in the center of the city and declared, "A man who thinks only the thoughts of his neighbors is not worthy of the name man." And in its full majesty and collective splendor, the mighty metropolis sat on him. To run a certain creation myth backwards, 'tis said that when the garden began to beg Adam to return, he said, "Watch it, bub." Number one on today's Urban Top 40 is the song, "A hazy mind is a satisfied mind, if, and don't you forget it, bub." And as the young snake left home for the lure of the bright lights, his father gave him this parting advice. Over there, whenever you run out of intelligence, just act serious. Anyone who sees their life prior to an awakening as an example of anything in particular remains an example of all that is dull and lethargic in man. Oh, did I ever tell you what happened? Well, while the allegory regarding the liberation of the mind, so often used by some, could be likened to switch metaphors, the final arrival in Istanbul, to use one of mine, the route of gradually increasing freedom there too could be pictured as based on your own ever-growing originality of thinking. A man who never strayed far from his home asked a lighting contractor, "What is the one bad thing that can be said about original thinking? There must be one." And the contractor replied, "You'll never know till you try it." And to himself the man huffed, "And for morsels of wisdom such as that, you get $70 an hour." By the by, one more time, oh my, lest anyone ever be inclined to undervalue the agility of man's natural-born mind, just remind yourself of how. If you note its normal inability to be original, it will, without missing a beat or working up any sweat, inform you of your error, and moreover, embrace its denial as part proof of its position. 'Tis indeed hard to ever slay a dragon made up of your own reflection. Graffiti in the men's room at one mystical monastery. Anything that can't be summed up in 5 words can't be summed up. Call Transcendental 555-29474 for a really good time. And a viewer writes, "Although you do sometimes approach being actually listenable and reasonable and sensible, that last item is the very sort of thing that makes me hoping mad." You mean hopping. Damn right. The sergeant in charge of civil defense for the dumb platoon noted that there was no need to build a fallout shelter if you weren't planning to fall in. And a young infantryman said, "Once I started to write you, but caught myself." One day a man thought, "I don't mind so much the idea that physically life just happens, but it does seem that it should or could be otherwise mentally. I wish there was someone I could write to about this." And the doctor who knows everything thought, "Boy, I hope he doesn't write me." A man went to visit a mythical monk and asked him, "If the awakening is not serious in any routine sense of the word, don't those teaching it have to present it as such?" And the sketchy one said that was the best question he had had all month, and gave the man a sucker and additional time to reconsider what he had said. Conventional thinking, the collective bell on neural herds. The ordinary mind cannot stay continually aware of the mirrored reality which exists parallel to all others it perceives. Without the ability of originality of thought, and the ability is not possible while one's consciousness remains diffused and unfocused, or in the language of the mirrored reality, too specific and focused. Dining calls on that fabulous express. Can you spot a mystic at your table? He's the one who can have everything on the menu. For those attempting that extraordinary internal space mission, misplaced seriousness is the major cause of death. That is, the premature demise of mental possibilities. Today's ha-ha description. A mystic speaking aloud is like a man cleaning out a closet. Ha-ha. The enlightenment is not for solving your problems. The enlightened have no problems. Ha-ha again. In an attempt to help prompt himself into new areas of intellectual activity, this one man would every day stop at the corner newsstand, and from the vast array of periodicals covering such subjects from archaeology to dance to farming to mathematics to sports to zoology and so on, would close his eyes and select one. And yet, as soon proven by the, shall we say, severely limited diversity of his blind selections, he was forced to totally reconsider his current conception of exactly what constitutes one's eyes being closed. Some years back, in fact, as soon as men were able to anagrammatically make the new word neuron from the old one hormone, someone apparently took the god Fate out back and shot him. And 10,000 mighty cities that were and are yet to be shouted with their collective strength, and good riddance. A more expectant man does not find he was entertained by any entertainment unless in some way his intellect was briefly ignited afresh. If thinking were a coloring book, then the few can color outside the lines and still make it look right. Proverbial wisdom, bird droppings of past mystical eagles. There is a magic to originality of thought not found in any other activities of the mind. Men began writing things down as they gradually stopped taking data directly from the air. Every time he had breathed, this one man would become a bit more enlightened. Then he woke up and realized it was a dream. A man asked a wandering mystic, if the ability to laugh about your search, is the ability to laugh about your search proof of anything? And the one with the bug-stained teeth stopped his motorcycle and replied, yes, it's proof that you've yet to pass the stage of laughing. And as he roared away, the man stood motionless for a while, wondering whether he should be pleased or not. Nomadic moral. Humor is a tricky thing, especially when it ceases to be funny. Going to pick up, sort of, we're at a place in the general vicinity where we were talking last time, and that is, using religious example. And for anyone who might be in TV land or somewhere new to this, such as last time I was using the words attributed to Jesus. It was about someone asking how they might more quickly reach a state of some extended consciousness. But I just picked that out. There's the same stories attributed to Muhammad, Buddha, Lao. And for those of you who may not tune in all the time, I would point out that I could select one and then the other in the same way that if I didn't want to use religion, I could have used something more mundane. I could use the Peloponnesian Wars and one week take the Athenian view and the next one the Spartan view. Doesn't matter. Should I write a news item, or how about to think about people that might hear this for the first time and try to give it their, quote, serious attention? And the opening clarification immediately puts them into some oblique funk like, it's not personal, dear viewers. Nothing's personal. Well, if it's personal, you're picking up as a ghost image on this show.
Yeah.
You got your cable stations bleeding on one to another. I was going to pick up a piece of something that we sort of touched on in a different way, but this is still having to do dancing around the edges, neurally speaking, of originality of thought and that kind of non-directional or omnidirectional journey from wherever you start, which can be called Paris, to the awakening, to another state of consciousness, to a more awakened degree of neural activity in your brain, to the kingdom of God, to the salvation, to the rebirth, to the regeneration, through being a good citizen. I was going to take all religion and point out to you that they could quite easily be distilled to a core, including such as the Ten Commandments and all of the primary dogmas of Buddhism, Islam, the best that you could collect from the Vedic literatures. But you could take everything from all the religions, and it amounts to don't take what's not yours. That's all the Ten Commandments are, and that covers every religion has some version. It, in fact, when you look at all of these, civil law as being just an offshoot, a restating, an attempt to plug up holes over and over of the Ten Commandments, you can see that everything about being civil, everything about being humane, and you don't have to be religious anymore, but it all amounts to be absolutely civilized. All that's required is that you do not take that which is not yours. If you'd like one second to think about it, that is all 10 commandments, again being the easiest example, it can be without losing a beat, without losing any iota of the reality behind it, without losing any of the operational intent of civilization, which is the ultimate aim of religion, or it's the greater purpose, the greater vineyards in which the small vines of religion toil. Hey, if it's in you, it's got to come out sometime. Unless you're philosophically adroit enough to suddenly grab a bromo before anyone knows what's happening. That is the basis of civilization, and that is all of the 10 commandments. Each and every one of them can be distilled to, do not take that which is not yours. And as I said, that is no matter how it's cut, no matter how apparently more Byzantine, how more complex it gets as you move from simpler times in the garden, herdsmen, farmers when you didn't have much, into today when you're talking about the theft of intellectual materials, copyright infringements, things that appear to be less and less specific. It is all based upon, don't take that, not yours. Now, I am going to give you an interpretation. Not only of that, but recall I'm using that as a kind of overall rubric of all religion, not even specifically aimed toward any denomination, but as the full march of the civilization of man, of men becoming more and more, gradually, spasmodically, individually varying at times from the collective, but the overall irrepressible march forward of men being guided by information from life going through the head as opposed to the gut and the pelvis. That men are being more and more under the leadership of neural information and serving neural needs than they are mere survival hormonal needs. All of that can be described. All of the, picture this great parade of progress at the collective level. It is like the police barricades. It's like the police sawhorses that they put up next to a parade route to try and keep everything sort of within some sense of order, to keep the parade people there and keep the spectators from coming out in the street. It's to create some sort of order. You can look at, don't take that, not yours, as that kind of overall directive. You cannot be religious by any definition of any religion by being a thief. You cannot be civilized by any definition in the world of groups that consider themselves interested in being civilized, which now takes up almost every person on this planet, without realizing that you're not supposed to be a thief. And some of you should be able to make your own note of this. It's not the point tonight. But it is not based upon, it does not have its origins in the mind. It is on the same basis, it all starts out, of do not steal that which would keep someone else from surviving. Now you may. Animals do it all the time. And they have no such morality, but each animal knows if you're fighting over that which is necessary or is fundamental to your survival at that time, you know very likely to fight to the death or to fight until somebody has been harmed enough. So there is no sense of thievery. I'll put it crudely, it's common enough, the survival of the physically most fit under the conditions at the time. So in a sense, now remember that's where it comes from, and it's after that, the idea of do not take, you could say the next step sort of might be do not commit adultery. Once men started thinking, see, and said do not steal food, do not steal or do not covet nor steal thy neighbor's food. And they sort of don't steal his sex, which is of equal importance, but they probably thought of that second, because you've got to eat to even stay alive long enough to do it, to screw. But at any rate, they all are gradual and varying from subtle to direct outgrowth of the prohibition that is non-stated, of course, at the physical level, of don't steal unless you can get by with it. Don't steal unless you're strong enough to pull it off. And of course, the other side of it, non-verbally, at the animal level is, don't let anybody steal from you. Kill them. And of course, at that level, you don't have to tell anyone. At the neural level, then it explodes. It then becomes a matter of cannibalism, plagiarism. It continues to feed upon itself, which we've been through before. If you ever have any doubt of my description of that, or if you think you have trouble seeing that that is a fair general detailing of the intellectual progress of man, the intellectual development of man, is a continual cannibalism. Well, let me get back more specific. I'll make it even, perhaps even vaguer. All of them are an outgrowth of something very simple, and then they must become more and more complex. And that's why you have to keep passing new laws in the civil world, because the more complex life gets, then you find an intellectual, read verbal, way out of some previous or some present prohibition, some law that says you will not steal in such and such manner, you cannot plagiarize a program in such and such manner, and then somebody figures out a way that bypasses, that seems verbally exempt from that specific prohibition, and so men have to keep passing new laws. But it's all the same thing. It is just a form of merry-go-round propelled cannibalism. It just appears to get more complex. And with ordinary minds, it does become more complex, as always. I'm not saying it's not. But it still can be distilled back to, all of it amounts to one thing: do not take that, not yours. Now here's what you're faced with. I presented to you tonight, the first time on this planet, thank you, a short 7 or 8, 9 word sentence that said, to first think, life teaches, be a thief. That is, does the sentence make sense? To first think, to get you thinking, to get man thinking, to first think, comma, life teaches, colon, be a thief. I would, in all sham humility, submit to you that that is a extremely pregnant, don't leave town yet, it hadn't been proven, pregnant idea in regard to what we're talking about of late. Now first off, if an ordinary mind heard that and could make some sense out of it, in other words, to start thinking you've got to steal. And at first a mind might think, well, giving me credit for being allegorical, they would say, well, somebody's got to teach you. And so in that sense, yeah, you're a thief. That's what education's about. Or as the ordinary civilized believes, that is part of what learning to be a human's about. that you need another human to help you in learning to be a human. Don't ever get caught in a drunken tango contest somewhere after the conventions, if they're having dual ones like between zoologists and psychologists or sociologists in the same hotel, and they later happen to kind of get intermingled, and somebody brings up the subject of little baby birds suddenly sing the right song. They'll wait a day or 2 or 3 hours, whatever the story is with any particular breed, and they're surrounded by other songs, and they listen once or twice, and they turn their head a certain way when their mother goes, and they go, and they got it forever. Don't wait for me to make the point now. Just do not get, if those two groups get involved, and one of them brings up that kind of subject, and they're in there, allegorically speaking, after having a few drinks, the serious business is over, and they're in the ballroom, and they happen to get accidentally intermingled, and that sort of subject arises. If I were you, if you take my advice, I would get against a far wall. Especially if you have delicate neural membranes. It would sound to an ordinary mind that I had stated in some way the obvious in some obscure roundabout way to say, the first thing life teaches, be a thief. The idea that you must be educated to think is, at best, city distractions. It is at best giving the mind a pacifier, the ordinary mind, because it does seem to be irrefutable that if an adult human does not in some way teach a child something intellectually, the child will never have an intellectual. And that to expand upon it past some elementary stage of being able to just speak a few words and say mama and daddy and I'm hungry, that to actually get any further in life, you must be educated. That is, you must go and pass along what they know. And so therefore, they would, an ordinary mind, at giving me some leeway, might take my sentence of, to first think life teaches, be a thief, for them to take it perhaps in some metaphorical manner. They would then be left with probably assuming that I was taking a shot at education. But to believe that you must be taught to think by another human is open to some further consideration. And of course, if you got any sense, the further consideration is about, well, it's about the same distance as between the mother bird song and the little bird going, Oh, okay. But back to just taking my way, my verbal presentation, that to first think life teaches, be a thief. If that be true, and it does, even though that would not be, is the reason I stopped to point out what an ordinary mind, what position they might take on that, they would have to agree that yes, you must, one person must educate another, one generation, one adult. Somebody who knows something must teach someone who knows less. And so if you're saying that you get your ideas from somebody else, yes. Yeah, if you want to call it a thief. So there you are. That even ordinary minds would agree in theory, in principle, giving me the maneuverable room they assume of speaking allegorically. But here's what you're faced with. It is not allegorical. There is no real way out. Life makes you steal. Now consider what you're faced with. If that be true, and that the whole attempt, the whole path to expanding what one understands, the enlightenment, an awakening of consciousness, is based upon anything but that it will not take you to Istanbul. It will not get you out of the immediate environs of Paris. You will never leave town thinking the thoughts of others. Consider the improbability of an ordinary mind ever coming to grips with what, even those who think they have a niche for something extraordinary, of them ever coming to any kind of practical grips with what it takes. That there it is, life initially tells you that to think, to start to think, be a thief. And then here I come along with this translation of it and say, do anything but. Do not be a thief. Now consider all the religions, as I distilled it for you, that it all comes down to do not take that which is not yours. And I could get ordinary minds, I could get theologians, I could get humanists without any particular religion. I could get them all to agree to that. Again, and they're giving me some leeway that I perhaps had some metaphorical or symbolic intention behind it. That, yeah, don't take that which is not yours. They do not see that that is in direct conflict with what life teaches you to think, how to think. Because I would submit to you, the ultimate, from the view of someone attempting to do something extraordinary, the ultimate in theft is taking other people's ideas. The very thing that life says, to first think, be a thief. I could have done that, I could have phrased it differently. We'll assume, I'll go ahead and say it, that some of you already could do it or thought about it. Life says, operationally, to first think, you must be a thief, is the point. But it doesn't, the way life works, when it comes out, the energy comes out in men's minds, it does not come out ever that directly. It did once. That was my story about you were there. Everyone had that one shot there on the assembly line wherein life looked you dead in the eye, and that was the one time that life said, in a sense, any of you can follow this, I know, that life spoke to you directly. That was actually the last time. Life just spoke to you directly without even having to say anything. It was actually the beginning of your ability to speak. But life looked at you dead in the eye, and almost everybody blinks and looks off, because in a sense you don't know what to say. You never heard anything like this. That's when life said things like, you're about to think and you're going to have to steal. After that it comes out, to first think, life says, you must be a thief. Or life says, be a thief. It doesn't say you must be. It says things like, be a thief. The whole idea of must be is forgotten. A few nights back when I did a series of little verses, one of them was called The Hand. It said the cards were dealt. The cards were dealt. They were on the table when you arrived. Now, I'm sure somebody can make something out of that, but any ordinary mind wouldn't want to make anything out of it that would disturb them. That's why it's reputed that very soon after men begin to think, to talk, that it's rumored that somebody took the god of fate out back and shot the son of a bitch. You remember that one tonight? And the 10,000 mighty cities that were, are, and yet to be, rose up collectively in their majesty and shouted out, good riddance! You're damn right. You understand, you follow that, right? When are we going to have somebody interpret me, make an interpretation? Do not try and hold on to a speeding hog trying to pull away from the curb, or your breath, waiting for that to happen. The mind, at the ordinary level, I'll back up and say it again. I know how uncomfortable it might get if we had someone here who had a reasonable, sensible outlook. To say that everyone looked away when life initially gave you that 1 second, point blank, right in the eye, and everybody blinks and looks away. It's not that you weren't supposed to. You didn't. There was nothing else to do. The rest of the story, you remember, was, and most people forgot it. A few didn't. It's not that you did anything wrong, because if you believe that, then you got the makings. If you got some funny clothes and some time in your hands, you got the makings of a new religion. Because that's all they are. That, well, wait a minute, we did something wrong. That's as good an explanation as any. I like that. Life looked us dead in the eye and we all blinked and turned away. I like that. What kind of wimps were we? What kind of wusses were we before we were real men? With education and stuff. It's not that there was anything wrong. But it is something that is not inescapable. As intelligent, insightful as you people are, I don't like to say it's not something irreversible. It's not something inescapable. It is not something incapable of further change. So you start out blinking. You start out live speaking directly, and you're not being able to hear it. You don't know what to say. You don't know what to do. It makes no sense. Or you just don't know what to do. There you are. You look down, and you just arrive, and your hand's already on the table. You're sitting there at the chair, and your hand's dealt. And what kind of damn game is this? It's not the kind of game that anyone can talk about. It's not the kind of game that an ordinary mind can sit there and even entertain the notion. If you do, at that level, which is of no great consequence, you are most likely a candidate to become neurally very ill. You become nuts, suicidal, frustrated beyond ordinary mobility. So men believe that things are other than they are, and they will explain me saying that everyone's a thief, that you must be, to start thinking. They can explain that as either being allegorical, and what little reality might be in there is in some way of me taking a shot at it, because education and the communication of wisdom, all that we've learned must pass on from one generation to another, and you've got to get it from another human, etc. So here you have at least a tripodian. Is anybody going to write me from the Shetland Rhetorical Academy again? A tripodial view of this, that you have life. As I've told you, and I'll stop the submitting, I am telling you, life tells you to first think, be a thief, which is all that's possible. You must do it. Men understand that under other guises. They can explain that away acceptably as education. It's nothing else. Then you have, among other things, me pointing out that all religions, the whole general verbal thrust of civilization, even sans specific religious sentiments, can be distilled into the notion of do not take that which is not yours. That civilization would crumble were that not given some widespread fidelity. All religions would crumble, but civilization itself would fall apart. The parade would stumble and trip and run amok. So you've got that, and thirdly, you've got me pointing out to someone attempting to accelerate the speed at which they move beyond that of the collective parade of man, you must directly abandon that. Because if there's anything you cannot be, is a thief. I was going to say, consider the improbability of a mind ever running across this, and you can further ponder the almost total lack of any possible public neural nourishment once you realize this. Because life is not, when things are arranged at, let's call it the 3D level, which I know sometimes throws people, but it's a fair spatial description of it. It's binary energy running what seems to be a 3D reality through your brain. When life makes people collectively, the sane collective thinking of people at any particular time, when it makes them look at something being true and correct, just unquestionably so, it's just a given. It is one of the perhaps even unstated dynamics of being a civilized, modern, thinking, decent, sane person, and it goes in this direction. It cannot turn on itself in the public arena. That is, you cannot. There is no information available. There is no data. There is no direction. There is no nourishment. There is no encouragement out in the general population, out in the cities, to tell a man, do not be a thief, intellectually. But notice what you're left with. I guess if we were psychologists, since they love to do all that and go, talk about your conflicting messages. They consider that to be a potential quagmire and minefield for otherwise decent, fairly psychologically sound people, that you can't put up with that in a family or in your work environment or anywhere, or in a relationship with somebody if they send out conflicting signals. You know? Does she love me? Does she not love me? Which again, if you need any more distinction between someone who knows what life's about and someone who doesn't, that, my friends, is a fair description of life. It's a series of conflicting signals. If it weren't, the machinery running things through a 3D reality would stop faster than a 49 Buick that had not been tuned up in 27 years with my brother Fletcher driving it. It will lock up on you in a minute. I should have done better than that. It would stop faster than a car that just had a transmission overhaul from Walmart. How about that? Life does not put out nourishment of any sort. It does not put out information that the ordinary mind can receive, that can entertain it at all, that is in direct conflict with the major information, with the major dynamics running thing. And the major one is that if you're sane, I can describe it in several ways, at least any of you think you're off in an obscure corner, the idea of being a thief, that the only way you can think is to be a thief. And I'm telling you that is directly not so to do anything extraordinary. But then from the ordinary view, it's not that they're stupid. All you got to do is check your own mind. We'll let that go. Plus, you might be thankful that we're probably not going to have enough time to do that test. I know I is. And I was going to give it. If I can remember where I put it. Life is not going to have out the general information that runs the machinery of life intellectually. That to be sane, you've got to think what other people think. Again, you know I do not mean that you have to be in verbal, literal lockstep with what other people think, but you think about these same things. And as a matter of fact, you know that it can be considered by those involved and any of their like-minded friends a sure sign of independent intelligence to be in conflict with whatever the major thought is in some area. In other words, if you were living in a hotbed of liberal politics, you know, around the campus of Harvard, and you, after being there on this faculty for a while, if you were at Harvard, then periodically, under certain conditions, you would begin to express your absolute conservative convictions about things under the right conditions. Assuming, again, you're sane, you wouldn't do it in such conditions, in such circumstances to lose your tenure or to upset the president of the dean of your school or president of the university. But to certain people, you would periodically would express, like, well, now I know what I'm about to say will probably strike some of you as damn near heresy, but I'm going to tell you what, in certain areas of the body politic, and you espouse something that can pass for being an independent thinker. You're thinking about the same things everybody else thinks about, which is why history is not entertaining, the news is not entertaining, because everybody thinks about the same things. It's only ordinary minds. Must I be blunt and say real little crude minds, little simple minds, little peach pit minds, little minds with an expanse perhaps best, or in one way, described as constipated, constricted, restricted, little Pogita brains. Anything that everyone else is thinking about is what I'm speaking of. It doesn't matter what position you take. Because there's got to be somebody taking one of two positions. Someone's got to be in favor of whatever's going on or not in favor of it. Either that or it's just one of the things that goes by on the news, to use as an allegory for it, or you're just not interested. But as soon as something comes on about sports, about crime, about politics, about economics, about anything, foreign policy, local policy, welfare reform, tax reform, anything, you either have an interest in it or you don't. And you turn away and you click the station or you don't pay attention. If you do have an interest in it, then you have a position about it. In the ordinary mind, there's no way to convince it otherwise. You can't tell it. Everybody's, yours included. You cannot tell your mind, you cannot suddenly turn your mind and go, wait a minute. How come you always get real flowery and you come up with all these great imaginary speeches that you would present to the U.S. Congress? Were you there? When it comes to, you're talking about defense expenditures and all this thing, where the hell do you go? Why don't you learn to think? In your mind, you try it on your mind. Your mind would look at you like, you idiot. You know, am I living here in the same skull as someone who is beyond my notice, has gone crazy? Because it would say, what do you call that? I call that thinking. Not if it's about what everybody else thinks, not if it's thievery. There's nothing to think about it. It's everyone else must think about it. Everyone else must take some position on something, or else you can be indifferent, not interested in a few things. I mean, because you only got so many brain cells in your mind. You only have so much time sharing available in that condo that you like to refer to as your intellectual capacities. You know. It's only so big. There are only so many square feet, and etc. That is not thinking. But again, life has protected itself because the mind can say, well, what do you call thinking? And all I can do is refer back to Dr. Enigma. I mean, he's answered it all. Well, if that's not what thinking, tell me what is thinking. That's Dr. Enigma doing gestures instead of verbal responses. You understand there is no nourishment publicly available. There is no data, there is no information, there is no secret, there is no writings, there is no history. There is simply no information in the public marketplace that conflicts with be a thief, no matter what they call it. They're saying, all religions, let's go back to where I started, that all religions, even the non-religious aspects of humanity, of civilization, can be summed up as, do not take that, not yours. What is the ultimate in that? To a human. Because we're now, we're speaking at the human level. We're not talking about taking food out of somebody's mouth or physically pulling their wife or husband away from them. We're not talking about the physical level. What is the ultimate theft? The ultimate taking? The thoughts of others. And there it is. You've got life. Starts out as soon as you become a human. As soon as you blink and look away, that is, your intellect gets ignited and you look away. In a sense, you become conscious at that moment. Ordinary people like to call it self-conscious. You become aware in some way, which animals are not, which you are not physically. Had you not developed an intellect, you feel self-conscious. That is, you feel there's a difference between me and all the rest of these Kens and Barbies on this assembly line. There's a difference between me and out there. But that only comes from here. It does not come from anywhere but here. So there you are. Life looks at you, and at some age, you blink, you look away. That is, you begin to think. You then feel that there is a gulf, there is a distinction between you and not you. And you begin to, what appears to be thinking. In the mind, your thoughts can defend themselves. If you say, you're not thinking, and your mind can say, well, what the hell you think it is? Just said you're not thinking. And you go, oh, well, now you are. You're like Edgar Bergen dancing with Charlie McCarthy. Jim Henson dancing with Kermit. Whatever generation you like. Paul Winchell. Never mind. Dancing with Jerry Mahoney. Life makes you steal. It's not wrong. It's not questionable at all. It is sanity. You are now thinking in some way what your collective herd is thinking. You are thinking what humanity is thinking. It's almost to the point that I shouldn't even have to add, according to your time and place. Right. The world is getting to the point that sanity on this planet just increasing at an ever faster rate of speed, that sanity on this planet in one place is not that far removed from sanity everywhere. Ordinary minds of anthropologists, sociologists, and etc. would still want to point out, well, they still have different customs here in Pakistan than they do in Sri Lanka or in Norway, and one religion different. Yeah. And they call it cultural differences, which of course the people who believes that you can shift the cards laid down on the table. They're the same ones that think, wait a minute, hit me. I'd like to. Yeah. Those are known as educated people, by the way, not to disparage them. It is almost to the point, as I said, that it's unnecessary to talk about the time and place. It is whatever is sane on this planet. That is the collective thinking of man at that time. The collective wisdom. I don't mean it in a pejorative sense. It is sanity. It is reality, which is, for those of you that didn't write it down, I'll define it one more time, at least. I'll tell you exactly, to save yourself from sweating down there in the minds, the philosophical minds of ontology. I'll tell you exactly. Reality is what the mind makes of life. Oh, okay. Out of all the descriptions, out of all that the mind thinks about this or that, to try and tell it that you are engaged in theft, and it has nothing to do with what is possible in a realm of thinking. It has nothing to do with what is possible in one man's mind. It will stop and dance again. It will stop and want to think about it. It will stop and want to ponder what you're saying, if it was giving it any serious attention whatsoever. What you're saying, if it was giving it any serious attention whatsoever. There is no nourishment publicly, commonly available. Now, I keep saying that. There's nothing out there that life puts out to conflict with itself. Now I assume by now I've said things similar to that enough times that you can see it. And one more time, that's not to in some way make some excuse for this kind of activity, or say, well, it's just never understood or it's hard to do. No. That's not the point. For me to say that there is no nourishment out there commonly, publicly available to conflict with the idea, to conflict with the directive, the operational, the functional directive, that to think you must first, to get going, to think, be a thief. You must be a thief. There is no information, I said, publicly, that conflicts with that. Which sounds as though it means, well, you got to go somewhere and find some secret information, very likely inferring here. That always sounds nice. How about this? Now let me clean up my earlier observation. There is no knowledge. There is no data to conflict with that. See, I took out the public, readily. There is no data to conflict with that. Do you realize what a time saver that is? That a man does not have to look for secret information at a secret school when he realizes there is none. There are such, but they do not fit the definition of school or information. It is more like very strange or invisible, freelance conductors at the Paris station that sometimes seem to wander up and down some of the platforms, and sometimes, to some people, apparently are calling out some kind of the damnedest schedule that you ever heard in your life that just peripherally makes any sense whatsoever. That there you are, and if you're interested and you think, I would like to get out of here, I really would. And every now and then it seems like it's either a shadow of somebody goes by, a whiff of somebody went by, a vague sound, almost inaudible, almost unintelligible, that sounded as though a guy might have been calling out a schedule that it just struck you that that might be what I'm interested in. That might be it. And by the time you look around, you're not sure who it was. You're not sure whether it was him that said it. You're not even sure, did I imagine it? That's about as close as there is. The place where it actually resides is simply in the future. That is, in the potential and in an unused area of your own brain. It is in originality of thinking. That is the only place wherein a man could actually be religious, which is not the point. That is the only place wherein you do not steal. You do not take that which is not yours. That saves a whole lot of picking and choosing also, if you can follow this. See, I'm saving you time and effort because you do not have to wonder, what should I think about so-and-so? Because you'll just somewhere surely in the back of your head you'll feel Dr. Enigma trying his best to go. You think, all right, what is it specifically that I should... Here you have life. Let me wrap with this kind of humorous and discouraging according to what seat according to where you are on the platform. Life is arranged, absolutely. I gave you a beautiful, brand new description as always. Quite all right. Don't thank me. That to first think, life teaches, be a thief. You have no choice. Everything that the mind ordinarily thinks is theft. Theft, plain and simple. It is as much theft as your genetic makeup, robbery, larceny, burglary from your parents. It just is. To think, you must steal. You must take the ideas of others. After that, and about you saying, well, I mull them over and I analyze them and all that, you're nuts. To think, you must steal the ideas of others. To learn, to reach an awakening of consciousness and enlightenment, you have got to do anything but that. And it's impossible, is it not? Just ask your own mind. Because you know damn well that's impossible. That could be sketched out mathematically, through symbolic logic, just through your own, what do you call it, common sense. That's not possible. Don't take that which is not yours. The religions do not understand it. I mean, it's far gone and it serves another purpose. The core of that, the distillation of that is regarding the thoughts of other people. And there it is, the injunction. I narrowed down all religions to that one, not untoward, telling of what all religion is. And that's the very thing you must do to be religious. How do you prove that you're a good Catholic or Jew or Muslim? That you take what it teaches. I mean, that's proof itself. It's known as faith, etc. How do you prove you're a good Irishman? How do you prove you're a good Norwegian, etc.? Everything that life says, and I might bring up one more, where I say, once you begin to understand this, you also understand, shall I say, the extreme improbability of ever slaying a dragon, even attacking it, when it's made up of your own reflection. Wait a minute. See, man thinking, which is a form of what? There's even a word for it. There's a synonym for thinking called reflection. I just thought of that. Originality of thought reflects nothing. Especially you, the thinker. Isolation tonight, they would all come down to this. There's really nothing to say about it. Except that's not true. It's not that there's not anything to say about it. There's nothing you can say about it. Would you care to tie that to the man who, after his first trip to Istanbul, his first visit, for days after, the most serious thing that he could say was, yep, And then began to wonder, how many trips does it take going there before you can't say anything? Before you're a seasoned traveler. At least the guy in the first story, he tried to respond to the guy, which you can look at as being you talking to you, talking about your own dreams, imaginations, and speculations. He said the one striking thing, or he could have said the one thing I can say that's not misleading, is that the city of Istanbul, therein, there is nothing in that place that you can criticize. Not one thing. Of course, I could send a man off. You could end up falling under a train after that. You could wander around the station there for years thinking, wait, a place where there's not one thing. You might grab him and say, just one more. You mean not one thing in that whole place to criticize? The guy went, and then disappeared. And you're left thinking, what kind of place has got not even one thing? Sounds impossible. Unless you take it instead of just, there's not one thing to criticize, and take it to the point of, well, there's nothing you can say about it. Of course, then if we have ordinary minds, which, does it frighten anybody? No. That I have so little trouble playing ordinary mind. An ordinary mind could go, wait a minute, that's a cheap way. I'd say there's nothing you can say about it.